Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and we read every single message. The stained glass windows of Sacred Heart Cathedral cast rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews as afternoon light filtered through. Over 400 guests filled the sanctuary, their voices hushed in reverent anticipation. They had come to witness what everyone believed would be a beautiful moment, the dedication ceremony for the new children's hospital wing, funded entirely by the Monroe family. Nobody imagined they were about to witness something that would make national headlines and expose a darkness hidden behind a perfect facade. Sarah Monroe stood near the altar, her hand instinctively protecting the curve of her 8-month pregnant belly. The burgundy maternity dress she wore had been chosen carefully by her husband, just like everything else in her life. She felt the baby shift inside her, a small flutter that usually brought comfort. Today it only reminded her how vulnerable she truly was. She glanced toward the front row where her husband stood, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile practiced and cold. Ryan Monroe represented everything the community admired: successful tech entrepreneur, generous philanthropist, devoted church member, the man who had single-handedly raised millions for charity. But Sarah knew the truth that lived behind closed doors. She knew the bruises hidden beneath her long sleeves. She knew the fear that kept her silent night after night. The ceremony began with hymns that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Sarah's father, Pastor David Chen, stood at the podium, his weathered face glowing with pride as he spoke about community, compassion, and the power of giving. He had no idea his daughter was trapped in a nightmare. Sarah had hidden it perfectly, just as Ryan had trained her to do. When Pastor Chen invited Sarah to say a few words of gratitude, she moved slowly toward the microphone. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her breath came shallow and quick. The light seemed too bright suddenly, the faces in the crowd blurring into an indistinct mass. She gripped the podium for support and opened her mouth to speak. The words caught in her throat. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen, stealing her breath. She gasped softly, her hand flying to her stomach. The baby kicked frantically as if sensing danger. Sarah's vision began to tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. She heard someone whisper that she looked pale. Another voice suggested she needed water. Ryan noticed the pause, his jaw tightened with barely contained rage. He had told her this morning with a voice like ice that she would not embarrass him today. He had made it very clear what would happen if she failed him in front of these important people. He stepped forward quickly, his hand closing around her arm with crushing force. To everyone watching, it looked like a supportive husband helping his struggling wife. But his fingers dug into her flesh like claws, and when he leaned close, his whispered words dripped with venom. "Finish the damn speech or I'll finish you," Sarah tried. She truly tried, but her body refused to cooperate. Another wave of dizziness washed over her, stronger this time. Stars exploded across her vision. The microphone picked up her ragged breathing, amplifying her distress throughout the cathedral. Ryan's control shattered. In one explosive motion, he grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her violently. Before anyone could process what was happening, his fist connected with her face in a sickening crack that echoed off the stone walls. Sarah's body twisted through the air. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her arms reaching instinctively to protect her belly. She crashed onto the marble steps leading to the altar, her head striking the stone with a sound that made several people scream. Pain exploded through her skull, her cheek, her ribs. But worse than any physical agony was the terror that flooded her when she felt her baby go unnaturally still. The cathedral erupted into chaos. Phones appeared instantly, dozens of them, recording from every angle. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Sarah's father stood frozen at the podium, his face drained of color, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Women screamed. Men rushed forward, some towards Sarah, others moving to restrain Ryan. But Ryan wasn't finished. He stood over his fallen wife, chest heaving, finger pointed down at her like an accusation. "She embarrassed me," he roared, spittle flying from his mouth. "In front of everyone. She deserved." His words died abruptly as the cathedral doors burst open with thunderous force. A woman stepped through the entrance, her silver hair swept back severely, her dark eyes blazing with an intensity that made the room fall silent. She wore a simple black suit, but carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Her gaze swept the scene, Sarah crumpled on the marble, Ryan standing over her, the shocked crowd, and her expression transformed into something cold and deadly. Pastor Chen's face went white. He whispered a single word, barely audible. "Catherine." Catherine Monroe, Ryan's mother and former federal prosecutor, crossed the cathedral floor with measured steps. She hadn't spoken to her son in 5 years, not since he'd cut her out of his life when she questioned his treatment of Sarah. But someone from the church had called her this morning, concerned about Sarah's safety. Catherine had been sitting in her car outside, waiting and watching, and now she had seen everything. She knelt beside Sarah, checking her pulse with practiced efficiency. Then she stood, pulled out her phone, and made 2 calls. The first was to 911, her voice calm and precise as she described a pregnant woman who had been assaulted and required immediate medical attention. The second call was to her former colleague, Detective Marcus Williams, now head of the Major Crimes Unit. Ryan tried to approach his mother, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "Mom, you don't understand." She was "don't." Catherine's single word cut through his excuse like a blade. "I saw everything, and so did 300 witnesses with cameras." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their equipment rattling as they rushed to Sarah's side. They placed a fetal monitor against her belly, and the erratic, frightening beep that followed made Catherine close her eyes in anguish. The baby's heartbeat was failing. As they loaded Sarah onto the stretcher, Catherine rode in the ambulance, holding the young woman's hand while Ryan was forced to follow in a police car. At the hospital, Sarah was rushed into emergency surgery while Catherine stood in the waiting room, her phone already flooding with messages. The videos had gone viral. News stations were calling, and Detective Williams was already on his way with a warrant. Ryan spent 3 hours trying to control the narrative, calling lawyers and publicists, threatening staff members who had witnessed the assault. But when Detective Williams arrived with a forensics team, they found something Ryan didn't know existed: Sarah's hidden medical records documenting 2 years of abuse, X-rays showing healed fractures, photos she'd secretly taken of bruises, a journal hidden in her father's office detailing every incident. Catherine had helped Sarah document everything during secret meetings over the past 6 months after Sarah had finally reached out to her mother-in-law, desperate and terrified. The arrest happened in the hospital lobby, Ryan's shocked face captured by a dozen cameras as Detective Williams read him his rights. The charges were extensive: aggravated assault, domestic violence, child endangerment, and attempted murder. When Sarah woke from surgery 3 days later, her father sat beside her bed, tears streaming down his weathered face. The baby had survived, though Sarah would need to remain hospitalized for the rest of her pregnancy. Catherine stood in the doorway, and when their eyes met, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for believing me." The trial lasted 6 weeks. The videos from the cathedral played on every news channel. Sarah testified from a wheelchair, her voice steady despite her fear, telling the truth she'd hidden for so long. Pastor Chen testified about the warnings he'd ignored, the signs he'd missed, the guilt that would haunt him forever. Ryan Monroe was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a small apartment Catherine had helped her find, holding her newborn daughter, Hope Catherine Chen. Through the window, she could see the sunrise painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. She had survived. She had spoken her truth. She had built a new life from the ashes of her old one. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Domestic violence thrives in silence, but together we can break that silence. You are not alone. You are believed, and you deserve a life free from fear. Hit that subscribe button because every story we tell could save a life. Your life, someone you love. Let's keep speaking truth together.